My name is Thomas Wiegand. I'm Chief Property Officer for Union Properties, a real estate development company based in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. First off, thank you to the Council. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here and to be in the running for this important award. What strikes me is that coming from a non-technical background, it's amazing for the community at large to have access to people of such incredible talent, and I'm enjoying the symposium very much. What I'd like to talk about is more in the context of the cultural and geographical position of the index rather than anything technical. I will leave that to our colleague at Foster & Partners, Mr. Blunt, to go into details on that. The building of the index has been the culmination of many factors, most tied directly to Dubai's evolution from a small seafaring village to a world-class city has become. I'm curious, how many people here have been to Dubai? Actually, more than I thought. That's great. As a point of reference for Americans, I'm tempted to compare Dubai with Las Vegas. It's unkind and it's not quite fair, but it is similar in that it's a mirage rising out of the desert without the gambling, of course. The mirage is complete with massive landscaped master communities, you might call suburbs, business parks home to Cisco Systems, Dell, Microsoft, as well as strip malls with TGI Fridays, KFC, and Krispy Kreme donuts. Next month, the UAE will celebrate its 40th anniversary as a nation. In that short time, Dubai has distinguished itself as a place on the world map. How did it become what it has in that short period of time? And how has Union Properties, coincidentally, taken a similar trajectory to start from a small developer to building something like the Index Tower? The traditional Arabic greeting, Salam Alaikum, means peace be with you. Dubai's success has been its ability to position itself as a safe haven and capitalize on delivering that peace in a region that has known unrest for the past few generations. The foundation of Dubai's success actually started decades ago with a commitment to developing the infrastructure, including the world's largest man-made port. You can see this upside-down F here between the palms. An award-winning airline, an airport which clocks 50 million passengers a year, a solid road and transit network, including a rail metro system, as well as world-class healthcare, education, entertainment, and leisure options. Add tax-free status to this, and you can see why Dubai has become the first choice for many international corporations seeking to do business in the region. By the way, if anybody figures out an app to work with Google Maps on time-lapse animation, let me know. Union Properties' success has been directly related to Dubai's success. We're a publicly listed company with shares traded in the Dubai Stock Exchange. Next year, UP will celebrate its 25th year, and our growth from a small portfolio of real estate assets to becoming the third largest developer in Dubai. Over the years, UP has earned a trusted reputation for delivering quality. As UP has grown, its business structure has become vertically integrated. As you see here, we're doing more than just develop at this time. Let's take a look at two of UP's, landmarks that provided UP the expertise and the confidence to take on a project like the Index. The first is Motor City. What we've learned from this is scale. This is the master plan. Comprised of 5 components, as you see here. It's literally built around a racetrack. Motor City is an entire city, home to 40,000 people when it is completed. The center is a Formula One certified racetrack. Next to it is the F1 theme park. Then we have medium density residential, low residential, and the business park. A day at the races, our theme park, which is still under development. If anybody is interested, we're looking for a JV partner to finish this one. This is our green community, low-rise, low-density residential. Water features, landscapes, stone streets in a virtually traffic-free environment, built around a lake. This is the medium-density uptown Motor City, also 100% built. The original design concept was a European spa town. Various unit types. Leisure facilities include the pools, gyms, playgrounds, and a high street, a commercial area with retail services and F&B. The last section in Motor City is our business park. That's their control tower and our management office. Moving across town to the Central Business District, we have our next project, which is the Limestone House. A unique concept that's been designed to the time-honored specifications of the master stonemason. The window length, breadths, heights are all determined by the traditional dimensions of masonry blocks. It's adjacent to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. There's also 16 residential spaces that complement it. It's designed by Gensler in San Francisco and built by Bouygues. Some images of the entryway, the enclosed interior courtyard, and facilities include the gym and the pool. The apartment layouts are completely fitted. This is a nice view of the DIFC neighborhood where the limestone is located. And it's also a good segue to the index, which is located in the same neighborhood. It's worth mentioning a little bit about the DIFC. Very unique product. This, the Dubai International Financial Center, is a city within a city, a financial city within a city. So in the center of Dubai, they've segregated 45 hectares of space, and though it's within Dubai city limits, it's administered separately with its own governor, its own legal jurisdiction, its own court system, all based on international business law, which take precedence over the local laws. It's a 100% free zone, allowing foreign ownership and zero taxes on income and profits. Unlike some of the other financial districts which become ghost towns after trading hours, the DIFC is a center for living, working, shopping, F&B, entertainment, as well as cultural and leisure activities. In total, there will be 40 towers, all built on a common podium. The built-up area is approximately 4 million square meters. Finally, getting to the index, it was the change in legislation in Dubai which allowed foreigners to own freehold property that allowed union properties to take on the idea of combining both what we saw in Motor City, which was scale, and what we were accomplishing in the Limestone House, which was grade A residential, to take on a project like the index. What I'll do now is just briefly, run through some images of the index as a teaser before I hand over to Toby in about 30 seconds. Another iconic structure created by Foster and Partners. It's mixed use, commercial and residential, with penthouses on the top. Brookfield Multiplex was our builder. It's destined to be a regional landmark, if not an international one. These are some images of the entryway to the commercial and the retail. rendering of the penthouse. All of the kitchens and baths are completely fitted. A rendering of the pool, which is still under construction, and a rendering of the office. There's our parting shot, where you can see at 80 stories, it has incredible views of the city and all around. Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you very much to everyone for coming, and also thank you to the council for giving us this wonderful award, and also thank you to Thomas for giving a little bit of background to Dubai and the context of the building that I'll talk about. As Thomas said, Dubai was originally a small fishing community and has expanded into this large city, and the DIFC in context is located to this part here. And when we first came to the site, this is what we found, very little context. And it really wasn't until the master plan that you saw in the previous slides was built out that we really had any context to work with. So it was quite difficult thinking about how we could design a building in this particular location. The site is to the south here of this. This is the large DIFC master plan. So one of the first things we did is really try and think about the context that the site's in. There were views from the site across to the Gulf, and also back towards the city and the Emirates Towers, which were already built. And then there was the anticipation of the Burj development over on this side, and a number of other developments in the Palm. But pretty much on this side, there were no views. This was really out to the desert. At the time, things have changed, but originally that was what we felt was happening there. Like a lot of people, we start a very intuitive process in thinking about buildings through physical modeling. And these are just a small example of some of the schemes or some of the forms of building we started to play around with. This again is our very sketchy model showing how we anticipated that master plan to be built. And you can probably see from some of these very early models, we had some idea of how the building form may take place. One of the things we do when we think about buildings, and we think about particularly sustainability in architecture, is this diagram that we use quite a lot. And it's quite simple, really. What it says is the thinking, the sort of the non-active elements of architecture and design can sit at the bottom of this triangle. Things like the material choice, the systems of construction, the external enclosure, the massing of the building, the form of the building, orientation. All those things are design processes that we can go through. And you get the biggest bang for your buck because the cost of those things are really with the architect and with the designer. It's not until you move up this triangle that you start to use active systems and obviously the associated costs. And really the purpose of this talk today is really to talk about how we approached the design and form of the building using ideas from this passive design part of the triangle. Simple diagrams like this are very useful for us because they're just sort of questioning how the form and orientation of a building can work. And we just simply sort of say, well, what happens if this is done like this? What happens if this is done like this? What are the positives and negatives? And this is one of a number of diagrams. This is the one that we ultimately settled on, and the idea starting to show about thinking about a building without a central core and pushing the cores to the perimeter of the building was something we thought about very early on in the process. Okay, this is a small animation which hopefully will work. Which will explain, if you like, the process, the diagrammatic process of how we got to the building form that you see today. I probably need to process again, but you got it. Okay. So if you think about a simple building form, a central core, one of the first things we thought about was orientating the building, turning the building so it faces east-west, taking the core and splitting that core away from a central core and pushing it to the perimeter of the building, now on the east and west side. And that helps reduce the load, the solar load onto the building. We then bring the residential building and sit it down on top of the office building and introduce the idea of vertical fins, which actually help self-shade the facade. On the south facade, because the building's orientated, there's only one facade on the south, we had to introduce shading elements. So these are the external shading which protect the office floors. On the residential building, we'll also be able to introduce the idea of ventilation slots, which allow the occupiers to open up in the winter months and naturally ventilate the accommodation. The form of the tower also enables us to capture some of the wind flow that hits the tower and drag that wind flow over this large water feature and use that evaporative cooling effect in the lobby space, which I'll show you a little bit later on. The other thing, of course, with a building of this sort of size and shape was obviously the structural system and how we were going to support a building like this. And one of the early things we did is we wanted to find an engineer who was capable of building a building of this height, and actually came to Chicago and worked with Bob Halverson to develop a structural system that in our minds was something that had to be expressive, simple, but obviously something that was capable of supporting such a large building. And these are just some very early sketches of some of the ideas we went through and some of the models that were tested to get to the form. And you can see here, it's very complicated in the sense that what we actually have is a residential building complete with numbers of walls and divisions and partitions, a very complicated concrete structure sitting on top of a large open plan, clear span office floor. And the idea with the office floor was it's in a financial center. We wanted to create a fully flexible floor plate and try and avoid any internal columns or interface. Obviously, we have to provide a core which runs through the center of the building, which services the residential building, but trying very much to create these large spans. And this was done with steel, 24-meter long steel trusses spanning between the bays. And the large concrete building was supported on a huge truss, concrete beam that sits in at the mid-level of the building and visually separates the residential building from the office floors below. So once we had a structural system, we then wanted to try and think about the architecture. And these, again, are sketches where we were looking at, the configuration of the cores on the east and west side. Should they stick out from these supporting A-frames? How we would treat these elements where we have these large structural ties at the mid-level and also close to the top of the building. And suggestions about whether the framing should come over the top and picture frame the building. The idea of introducing shading elements at the top. Balconies where the cores on the office cores drop off at the lower levels. Could we use the spaces within there, partly structural supports and ties, but also amenity spaces for the apartments? So the building, as we say, sits within this large master plan. And you can see primarily the grid of the master plan runs in this direction. We were one of the few buildings to twist that and turn it so as we could orientate the building to the east and the west, placing the large mass of cores on the east-west side of the building, thus protecting the floor plates from the huge solar gains that you get in Dubai during the summer months. We also were very interested in the whole aspect of how the building interfaced with the master plan. It's actually quite an interesting master plan because it's actually primarily a pedestrianised space with all the parking kept below. And as Thomas said, it's about a mixed-use development, so there is a live-work type of environment, and there's also a large retail area that sits below here. So we wanted to connect into that, but also provide an amenity space for people using the buildings, and ultimately came up with a landscape park within our own perimeter with a number of buildings that surround that. These are retail buildings. And then below that, there's also retail, which connects back into the main retail strip. And then the building itself, the podium was cut away to enable us to drop the building into this sort of recessed area with this water feature, which runs around the edge. So when you come and approach the building from this side, you get a feeling that the building is actually hitting the ground and is actually grounded. The ideas of mixed use and the different functions in the building and the orientation, this is one of Norman's sketches which show the feeling of how the building was put together. And as I say, we work through different types and different mediums, and right away from the beginning, these are very early renderings of the buildings, to the sort of sketch models that the architects actually build, to ultimately the delivery of that project. And you can see we try to be very rigorous about how we follow through on the project. So the brief that we were given was really the two primary functions, the office floors and the residential spaces. The public realm, the entrance to the building, the office is about 70,000 square meters of office space. Residential apartments, again, about 70,000 square meters of residential apartments, varying from 1 bed to 2 beds up to 5 beds. And then crowning it out is some very exclusive penthouses which sit on the very top of the tower. And this is separated, the office floors from the residential floors are separated by what we call the club level. And this will ultimately house restaurants and swimming pool facilities for the guests. But it's also the front door to the residential. So people coming up into the building get into a high-speed lift and actually arrive at this point. So your first appearance at the residential is actually at the mid-level with fantastic views over Dubai. So bringing all these components together, working with the structural engineers to bring a system that holds all these components together, the cores that slide into the east and west, and the final sort of diagrammatic configuration of the building. The other thing we had to consider with it was the idea of what materials do we use for the building. These are some construction shots showing primarily it's a large solid concrete framing with the infill, the elements of glazing and the infill panels. But we also wanted to look at how do we treat the large mass of concrete fins. And we ultimately chose to actually clad them in a precast concrete material with some relief on it to give some appearance of shadowing. We've done a lot of work. We've been fortunate. We've done a lot of projects in the Middle East. And we've done a lot of work actually trying to understand the climate and understand the performance of materials in that climate. Because it's very important when you're thinking about sustainability, how do you use, what types of materials do you use for the building? We actually have a research team that's spent some time out there looking at different types of material and understanding how they perform in that climate. And we have sort of, for example, we have reference materials. You take a black material with absorptivity and emissivity about the same, and then you take a white material which has less absorptivity, and you use those as sort of benchmark materials. And then we compared against them a number of different materials to get some feeling about how these perform in that climate. So for us, we were looking at solid precast concrete elements. Some of the materials we tested were simple aluminium sheeting that you'd find in metal-clad buildings and glass-reinforced concrete elements. But ultimately, we wanted to use something more solid than that. And these are sort of close-up images of these precast panels that were clad onto the building. And you can see from this, actually using these thicker materials actually uses us, and the coloration of those materials actually gives us a good performance in terms of the heat load that comes ultimately into the building. And all that helps reduce the energy consumption that the building has. And how do we know that? We have done some very initial testing of the building's performance, and we will continue to do that. But our initial results are showing quite positively. And we actually took some measurements on a day which was measured at 36 degrees at Dubai Airport. And we were finding that in the open lobby space at the base of the building, we were getting a temperature difference of less than 33 degrees drop. So the idea of a microclimate being created in that lobby was proved out. The office floors, although they are still unoccupied, we were finding that the temperature on the north and the south facades were actually at a similar temperature, so it demonstrates that the shading devices were working. The residential is more difficult to measure because obviously it's a fully air-conditioned space, and the time we took the measurements was in the summer condition, so the natural ventilation wasn't being used. And then typically at the top of the tower, on the outside of the tower, you're getting a couple of degrees loss through air movement, and you'd expect that. So going really back to the sort of design and what we were looking at, these again, an early image of the building and what it looks like today. And one of the key things, as I said, at the bottom of the building was about the public realm and how do people interface with the building. We didn't want to enclose the bottom of the building in a typical sort of glass enclosure. We wanted to create a space that was deemed to be external but shaded. These elements were ultimately enclosed elements. There's the water movement, large water pools, a very sort of cool space in the desert was what we were trying to achieve. And the completed building here, you can see these spaces are very successful with very small glass enclosures where the office cores come down. But the rest of this space is very open and is a great space to walk around in. And here you can see how we limited the glass enclosures for the office core spaces, and then these bridges that float across the water pools. And this is the water wall, and you actually walk through that water wall to get through into the retail space beyond. And these are just some images showing the building in use, in operation. And you can start to see the feel of this space. It actually creates quite an intimate space. Although it's about 15 meters high, when you're in there, you actually feel quite intimate. And this was designed by a Fluidity out of LA, and the idea was that we wanted to try and make as much water movement as we possibly could to get water moisture into the air to help with that evaporative cooling effect. And if I take you sort of through a quick journey through the building, this is the main lobby space, and these are the very high office lobby areas. And we tried to sort of introduce dynamic sort of cladding areas to add a little bit of dynamic to the experience of when you come into the office. And this is the this is the residential lobby. Currently, it's obscured glass because there's still completion work to be done to the club area. But the idea is when you stand there, you actually will have views right across the city. And at the very top, very quickly, just the penthouses with stunning views towards the Burj Khalifa. The introduction of shading devices to protect people using the balcony areas. And actually, we've also had the idea of introducing swimming pools to the very top penthouses, which you can see here, and the large double-height spaces of the penthouses. And that's the completed building. Thank you very much.